Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farba. In the early hours of Wednesday, Poland shot down Russian drones that violated its airspace during strikes on Ukraine, calling it an act of aggression and shutting down several airports. Now, days before all this, Russian, Belarusian Zapad 25 military drills are also underway, and Warsaw has also closed its border with Belarus, citing rising provocations. Now, to assess the latest for NATO's eastern flank, we're joined now in the studio by Reuben F. Johnson, director of the Asia Research Center, Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation, and military expert. Good to have you. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you for having me, sir.
So right now we were hearing that the National Security Bureau of the Polish government has just concluded its session. The Prime Minister is convening his cabinet's emergency session this morning. That's happening right now. First reactions to all this. What does Poland do next?
Well, what would be likely, depending on the decision that comes out of the Prime Minister's discussions, that they may, next step may be to go to the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, and say, Poland would like to declare an Article 5 violation. I doubt that that's going to happen. I think that what will happen is, as my friends in the diplomatic community will rather cynically say, is probably we'll see some more sternly written letters. But this may be an impetus to other things. This may cause additional sanctions packages to come in. I mean, we're reaching the point now where events may be getting to the point where we don't control them, but they control us.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about those events, because I mean, if I remember, it was about 2 years ago, we had an incident as well, similar to what's happened just earlier this morning. You had a violation of certain drones, but no action was taken in that sense. Now, here we have the first time, to remind our viewers, there's an engagement by NATO assets, by Polish assets, against Russian drones that flew over and violated Polish airspace. So let's look at the effects of that. Tell us a bit more. We know roughly there's been about 12 drones that violated. Do we know anything about how this happened? I mean, was this deliberate? Tell us a bit more about the circumstances.
Well, of course, the Russians now have been, every attack is larger than the previous one, it seems. But this, in these numbers of drones crossing the border, this has to have been deliberate. Or at a minimum, it has to have been, well, if we do this, they'll fly into Poland, and then we'll just see how they react. I mean, there is a Russian, it goes back to the Soviet period strategy that they have. They call it reflexive control. Okay, so they're always trying to predict how we'll react institutionally. And reflexive control says you will try to make your adversary unknowingly make decisions that are bad for them, and that's their game.
Mm-hmm. Also, testing us. I think this is something that comes up more and more often as well. It's also concerning at the same time, in a way, if we're looking at the airports, certain airports in Poland. We have Warsaw, also Rzeszów in the south, and Lublin, which have been closed this morning. So how vulnerable are we here, and what does that say about our readiness?
Well, yeah, we're like everybody else. We're dependent upon civilian infrastructure to carry on daily life, and when that is shut down for whatever reason, we have, of course, tremendous follow-on effects from all that. But yeah, we're very vulnerable. Poland has the ability to react. It has an air force of some fairly modern jet aircraft. It's acquiring new air defense assets all the time. The question is it enough for a full-scale conflict? Probably not yet.
Mm-hmm. And also back to the drones, or the information that we have. I mean, they're currently being recovered. There's obviously authorities on the scenes. Looking at the actual violation itself, I mean, certain distances that information is coming to us. But if we're looking also at likely the Shahed drones, I mean, what are the circumstances behind these? We said it's likely deliberate. I mean, the target was Lviv, was Western Ukraine. So how does that work in terms of signaling? Was this pre-programmed? How much off course can these things go? Tell us a little bit more about the technicalities behind this.
Well, the drones themselves, and I've looked over, I don't know how many different schematics of what these things look like on the inside. So it's very commercially available hardware. It's nothing very sophisticated, nothing that would cost huge sums of money. Sometimes the drones are jammed and they go off course. Sometimes the other thing the Russians do is they'll send several what they call decoy drones, drones that don't have the full package of the guidance system on board, but they're sent to overload the zone, to flood the zone, to overload air defenses. So we don't know how many of these were the full up system and how were they decoys, but there's enough of them that this has to have been deliberate, and at a minimum it was a careless disregard for the sanctity of NATO airspace. I mean, the Russians had to have known that something like this would happen.
We're getting reports as well that the Prime Minister of Poland is in touch with NATO Command, with Secretary General Rutte. We'll see what's decided on later today. But I'm also curious in terms of what happens next also from the United States. I mean, we already have some strong words. I just want to share really bipartisan words here. One from a U.S. Senator, Democratic Senator, Dick Durbin, calling Russia's drone incursions a test of NATO's resolve. And a Republican, Joe Wilson, labeling an act of war. That's quite serious. I mean, how much is this going to impact, if at all, President Trump? I mean, I think a reporter earlier asked him as well. He was leaving an event, didn't give a response. But is this going to be what's going to push the needle in some kind of stronger response of Donald Trump in all this?
I think there's a very real possibility of that. I want to remind everybody that on July 4th, General Keith Kellogg was sitting at home hoping to enjoy a restful July 4th weekend, being the big American Independence Day holiday. And he received a phone call from Foreign Minister Sikorski, who said, hey, guess what? The Russians have hit the Polish embassy in Kiev. And he immediately got on the phone, private line or private mobile phone to Trump, telling him what had happened. What did that do? Well, that broke this logjam of American weapons, which had been halted. They were sitting here in Poland, hadn't been shipped across the border yet. And Kellogg was told by Trump, he says, you call Pete Hegseth and tell him to send those weapons. And if he doesn't believe you, have him call me. So these are the kind of follow-on actions that can happen. This could move the needle. I expect it to move the needle on some other things like sanctions or tariffs. We keep talking about 100% tariffs on India and China for buying Russian oil. That could easily happen now.
We'll have to see what the president does say when he does say it later on today. Also curious about one of the things that's happening right now. You mentioned that one attack where some Russian missiles strayed and hit some Polish embassy, damaged some of that in Kiev. I'm also reminded of that about a week ago. We also had the European Union Representative Office damaged as well in Kiev, looking at that. So, I mean, this is deliberate. Is Putin, with all this, sending a message somehow?
Oh yeah, and this is, I mean, those the damage caused by those buildings in Kiev, that could have been simply collateral, possibly. But there have been other incidences. There was in the middle of July this factory in Vinica, which is owned by the Barlanek company, which makes wooden flooring, owned by one of the richest man in Poland. This factory was hit by 3 different drones coming on 3 different vectors. You could look on the radar map and see this was deliberate. And it was the Russians saying, okay, we're going to hit the factory owned by the richest man in Poland who has all kinds of connections. Let's see what happens. It's always that. Well, let's see. What do they do next?
Also, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on this. We have these Zapad West exercises, Russian, Belarusian. They happen every year.
Every 4 years.
Sorry. Well, sorry, every 4 years.
Yeah.
But this time, I mean, the numbers are scant. We don't know exactly how many troops will be involved, but experts have certainly less than they have been in the past. The Prime Minister of Poland closed border yesterday with Belarus. Is this what we're seeing this morning? Is that any way connected to that?
I believe that this is probably Putin's answer to, how dare you? And this is the response. And yes, the Zapad 25 exercises are far fewer numbers of personnel involved this time, but that makes them no less menacing and no less dangerous.
There's a nuclear component to that, if I'm looking at my information here. Practice deployment of the Oreshnik ballistic missile. How should we react to that being included this time?
Well, the Oreshnik, that's a really interesting story in itself because it was used once on Ukraine, and then we were promised by Putin that they would darken the skies, and we haven't seen any since. And this is because the Russians have real problems producing some of these systems now. They have tremendous difficulty inside of their own defense industrial complex because they're not able to buy many of the components from abroad that they used to depend on for production of their missile systems. And some of the things they have to buy from abroad are surprisingly elementary, like ball bearings. Ball bearings you need to be able to make tanks, and then you need the ball bearings to be able to make the rail cars so you can haul the tanks away onto the battlefield. And up until the war, they were still buying ball bearings from Germany. So all of these things have caused problems for the Russian defense industry, which we can only hope will get worse for them.
Speaking of causing problems, I mean, Belarus has been also key in all this. I mean, there's obviously a lot on the border. Poland has fortified that. There's many more guards there. There's a wall. Everything that's an area where Poland and, I mean, NATO security and the European Union security is very, very key. If we're looking at also airspace violations, also by Belarus, that's not the first time. How is this going to change any policy here? I mean, is that the vulnerable spot here? Is Belarus the point? What does Poland do next? What does NATO do next in this area? If it's Zapad, if it's what happened early this morning, what's next here?
Well, I'm not terribly objective on this point because I know a lot of people in Belarus and some of the senior Belarus opposition and exile figures. But Belarus, as they say in Washington, has been a foreign policy black hole. Everyone has tried to pretend it doesn't exist, or ideas go in and they never come out, hence the black hole analogy. But they've been key to all this chaos we're seeing right now. I mean, it was in 2020 when Lukashenko had stolen the election by any objective measure. He'd stolen the election, and there were hundreds of thousands of people in the street, and you could have knocked him over with a feather, and no one did anything. And if he'd been removed at that time, this war would have never happened. We wouldn't be sitting here. We wouldn't be talking about this. And it continues to be a huge. It will continue to be a huge problem and a huge sticking point until something is done.
Also nearby, we have this so-called Suwałki Gap, this corridor, about 100 kilometers, that could really be, some experts calling it that Achilles heel of NATO, of the eastern flank. With the Zapad exercise, what's happened today? How vulnerable is that corridor? What should be done about it?
Well, there have been plans on the books here in Poland for some time. I don't know how far advanced they've been because I'm not privy to the General Staff deliberations, but there were plans to the point of setting up special units, special fortifications, all sorts of measures to, if the Russians were to come through there, how to slow them down, how to break up their advance, how to cut them off. It's a huge area of vulnerability, not just for Poland, but for the Baltics. It would cut off the Baltic states from the rest of NATO.
Right. So it's going to be intense hours, next few hours indeed. Yeah. But look, being vigilant, seems that everything's in hand with the government at the moment. And look, we'll close it there. Thank you so much, Reuben F. Johnson, for coming in, sharing all your insights on this worrying, but also very vigilant and important day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for watching World Talks, but there's much more as we continue our coverage here on this issue, but many more, so stay tuned on TVP World. Goodbye.